Well, hello and welcome to today's edition of Wednesday Palaver. Today's edition is not like any other one we've had in the past, because we're going to discuss a subject that is often misunderstood, a subject that sometimes evokes unnecessary passion and so on. And when I talk about unnecessary passion, I'm talking about the passion of those who fail to realize that we live in a male-dominated society, and their reaction to issues that are raised by feminists and so on. Today's discussion is about activism, but it's about a special kind of activism which tackles gender-based violence. And today's discussion is not just about those of us in the studio and in Ghana. Today's discussion is actually stimulated by an international effort to focus attention on gender-based violence. Indeed, the International People's Assembly has set aside sometimes 6 days of activism to end gender-based violence. And that is why we decided that today we will use this forum to discuss the issue and to generate awareness. This program is being broadcast to 32 countries in Africa and a lot more countries in other parts of the world. This program is also being broadcast live on Facebook. And we invite the audience to join us by WhatsApp. The number is on the screen. And we want to have comments also on our Facebook page. Today, we're going to follow the normal format. We have with us in the studio Mami Equia Areba, who is described as a survivor and a feminist activist. And she's going to give us a presentation which will last anything between 15 and 20 minutes. And thereafter, we're going to come to the studio audience for their reactions, comments, questions, and so on. And then we'll move on to our Facebook and WhatsApp pages and take comments. And then Mami Equia will come back to the microphone and deal with those issues. And then we'll come back to the studio audience, and then eventually we'll have a final wrap-up from Mami Equia. It's indeed my very distinguished pleasure to invite Mami Equia to the microphone. Mami, please come to the microphone.
Hello, everybody. As Mr. Pratt rightly said, it's not an easy conversation that we're about to have, but it's a necessary one, and so that's why I'm here today. He did touch on the fact that today marks the beginning of 16 days of activism by the UN. This year's theme is centered around what I like to call put your money where your mouth is. And so we're moving the acts of violence against around what violence is, what sexual gender-based violence is, how it manifests in our society, and what we can do to fight against it. For those of you who do not already know, even though it's something that we've spoken about quite a bit, in simple terms, sexual gender-based violence is basically just violence against women, girls, sometimes boys and men as well, based on their gender or gender stereotypes in a particular society or whatever society they find themselves in. A lot of the times when I speak about this, I like to tell people that our activism starts at home. The reason being is that a lot of the women and girls who go through this are at home 7 times out of 10. In this room, we're more than 10 people here. Imagine you are at the Accra Sports Stadium and there's a match, and the stadium is full of people, and you look around you, and there are women and men. 7 out of every 10 may face sexual gender-based violence, but 3 out of every 10 people that you see. Imagine the volume of people in the Accra Sports Stadium filling that. And out of every 10 people you would see, 3 out of those 10 people, those 10 women, have faced violence against them, either from an intimate partner or sometimes even strangers. I think when we bring that conversation to a more realistic level is when we tend to understand the gravity of what this does to people and how pervasive it is in our society. If you have a friend circle of 20 people or 20 women, imagine that 6 out of the 20 women have faced gender-based violence. 6 people that you know out of the 20 women that you know. Think of your families. You have 10 cousins. 3 of them have faced gender-based violence out of the 10. And the problem is also that the 3 of them who would have faced gender-based violence would most likely face it from an uncle or a brother or a cousin or a grandfather or a father that you know. And so I think when we bring it down to that level of the home and how pervasive and how close it is to us as a people, then we start to understand how it affects us as a group. Because we can very silently sit down and say that it hasn't happened to me and therefore, and I don't know anybody. But we should also understand that a lot of the times it's happened to people that we know and they have not told us. Why do they not tell us? This is something that I know that a lot of people don't like when we feminists say. But rape culture in our country is something that we need to talk about, and that's what I'm going to be really zeroing in on today. So what is rape culture in simple terms? It's those narratives, those biases, those things that we have been brought up with or heard, or it's bad, but there may be a justification. There might be, it's really bad, but we might be able to say something, maybe it was this that caused it, but not really. It's not really the issue of the rape, but what's happened before it. It's calling a 9-year-old, my small wife, and normalizing calling that girl your wife. It's seeing a small boy saying, mikun kitwa, and thinking that's okay to, in your mind, put a child on the same level as you would your sexual partner. It's seeing women and saying, but she shouldn't be going out at that time because, if you go out, it's dangerous. And basically saying, so if they had just stayed invisible as human beings and had hidden in their rooms, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But then when you think about it, does that make sense? Should we just cease to exist because these things happen, or should we speak about the issues? And so that's what I really want to hone in on today. Think about your regular Ghanaian home. When you walk into a Ghanaian home and you go to the sitting room, who's more likely to bring you a glass of water? Think about who is more likely to serve you food. Where are you more likely to see the boys? But not doing the hard things. And so those are some of the things that we need to look at when we're talking about the gender stereotypes and gender roles that make girls either quiet and subservient and make society ignore when girls talk about their issues, or when we don't even talk about it, but we're going through something. Why is it so easy to brush over girls' trauma or the things that we go through? And those are all things that come in to contribute to our rape culture. And you would say, what does cooking food have to do with rape culture? Think about it like, they put a person in a particular role all their lives. The only thing you tell them is, you can be the assistant school prefect, or you can be the first lady, or you can do all you want to do in this world and achieve all the things you want to achieve, but at the end of the day, if you're not married, you're not that useful to your society, because and without the marriage. And so immediately that says that their attachment to a man is what makes them important. What we don't realize is that when we do that, we also tell the boys that if a girl is attached to them, it's the only time that she's important. And so her agency, her independence, all those things are attached to the boys that they live with, the men that they are related to, or the men that they work with or marry. So you're telling the girls, you can be important, but you're only very important when you're married or you're attached to a man. And you're telling the boys, girls are only important when they're attached to you, so far as you find them attractive or you find them useful to you. And so you create a box and you put the two in. And then now you come out and you also say that girls can be independent, and girls can be this, and girls can be that, while still maintaining the systems and the narratives that you've put in place, saying that girls are only useful, truly useful and worthy of praise and honor, and being crowned the Proverbs 31 woman when they are related to a man. So immediately you've created a division between them, also lying to them that they can still be great. Oh, you can still be great, but boys, you should respect women, but it's their attachment to you that proves that they're worthy of respect. And then you find the women who don't want to be attached. Then what happens? Or you find the women who are not focusing on attachment. Then what happens? Society decides we must humble you. Get married so that you'll be humble. And then when you don't, is get a man to have sex with you so that you can be humble. And then it's we must humble her. And then you find one person who you may sit down and think, I'm just saying they should be humble. But you also have those people who would say, let me take it to the next level and humble her physically, or humble her, in the way I understand how. These are just different scenarios in where we don't see how our gender roles and the boxes that we put our children in, especially in a home, goes to tailor how they see their fellow man or their fellow woman. And so you find that boys who do not conform too much to what society says boys should be are called kojobesia. They are called soft. In my language, they would say iyentuhua. It means they just put you on the floor and you soak up rubbish. This is what they're trying to say. However, we don't understand that as human beings, we are not in a box. We're different. We're diverse. And so we shouldn't be putting people in that box. But by putting them there, those things contribute to the rape culture that we see. And so you say, but I only cracked a joke about, sleeping with a child. But it was just a joke. But why are you laughing at somebody what's funny about sleeping with a child? What's funny about raping somebody? What's funny about slapping a woman? Why is your artistic, comedic talent all centered around violence against women? And these are ways in which we normalize, not just against women, but also boys. Because a lot of boys who do not fit the bill also fall into the category where they are abused, if not sexually, physically, for not being man enough or not being boyish enough. We got so bad. He's too womanly, as if that's an insult. And then we come to the second thing. Why is being a woman an insult? What is denigrating about a woman that if you tell a man that he is too much of a woman, why is it an insult? And why is it also an insult when you tell a woman you want to be too manly? So that tells you that we've actually normalized making negative stereotypes about ourselves okay, but that this is what you're doing. So if you tell me I'm being a man because I'm a feminist, okay, but what's so bad about it? It means you must know there's something bad about it that makes you uncomfortable with me talking about the issues. Because why should you tell me that I want to be a man because I'm assertive? Think about it. If you're assertive, why does that make you bad? Why does it make you manly? Why is it associated with manhood? And it's bad. Why is it bad? What's so bad about that manliness that you don't want a woman to exhibit? So right there, you've shown your hand that there's probably something wrong with you. You think there's something wrong with you, is why you don't want me to become like that. So those are things that you need to question. And those are things that we need to look at as a society. Why do we create these boxes? Why do we put our kids and ourselves into these boxes? Oh, she wants to get married early, so it means she's not serious in life. She wants to go to school, it means she wants to be a man. She wants to learn till she's 40. Oh, then there must be something wrong with her. Why doesn't she want to give birth? Oh, every woman has to be a mother. Every man, men are not supposed to take care of kids in the house, they only have to provide the money. These boxes that we put ourselves in are all things that come together to create the systems and the narratives that we see as oppressive to women and to boys and girls as well. A lot of the time when we talk about sexual gender-based violence that we give to children is what contributes to how we and the children that we are raising perceive themselves and the violence that's being meted out to them. And so when we're speaking of SGBV, I like for people to bring it home to things that we understand. So we understand in the normal Ghanaian home, a girl serves you water before a boy. That's something that's very normal. And so talking about that is something that will bring your mind, oh, that's actually true. What are the gender stereotypes that contribute to seeing girls as objects for servitude and for nurture? And meanwhile, there are so many women who do not know how to nurture, if you want to be very honest. How many times do you go on the streets and see mothers whipping their children mercilessly, and you're thinking to yourself, why would you? That's not a very nurturing thing, is it? It shows you that not every woman is a nurturer or a calm, nice, loving person. There are very, very vindictive mothers. We hear about it all the time. Yet because we've created a bubble around what womanhood should be, even when it's not fitting into that bubble, we want to force it to fit there. And all those little gaps and holes contribute to how we view issues surrounding women and surrounding girls and children in general, to be honest. And so as we go through the 16 days of activism, I would like for us to, in as much as we'll be talking also about how we can support and fund, I would like us to also think about how we ourselves and the little things that we say and do contributes to silencing victims. For instance, if you're on social media and you post something, or someone posts something and you go and say, oh, but she shouldn't have been drunk. Do you really, really think that if your friend ever gets attacked, she's going to come and tell you? And you wonder why so many women and kids don't say anything. But you don't need to know someone or actually tell them to know their reaction. You can just read it. You can see it. And that's the problem as well, because we live in a generation where everything we think and feel is right there in the open because we post it willingly. And so those are things that we need to watch as 21st century adults. We're talking, we're interacting, we're engaging. What kind of engagements are we having? Are engagements sensitive to people who have survived? And that's why people will be angry when, feminists will say this person needs to be taken off a campaign because they made a joke about sexual violence. Yes, and you say, oh, but it was just a joke. Oh, just forgive him. Yeah, but have you thought of the impact and the negative impact that it has on victims of sexual or survivors of sexual violence? Have you thought in value what you've done to somebody who was probably going about their day and probably had to relive that trauma? Because as a survivor, I can tell you that as much as I've gotten to where I've gotten to in my own healing, it's very hard when someone else tells me about which is a job that I do. I deal with a lot of survivors, and I'm a survivor myself. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to sometimes take a break for sometimes a year and just not do anything about sexual violence, because it takes such a toll mentally and emotionally on you, having to relive that trauma every time someone comes to tell you what they have been through. So imagine you're on your social media and you go there to vent or just to be happy or crack a joke, and you see some thousands of people under a comment section laughing at something that has so negatively impacted you. Imagine what that does to the random person who has not made it a job and therefore must not have, the right tools to handle that kind of negativity. Imagine what it's like to see a public figure talk about sexual violence as if it's nothing, or laugh at it, or use it as a political gambling chip, because to him, he doesn't see anything wrong with what's happening. Saying, oh, but he's so and so and so, and so it doesn't really matter. These are all things that we need to think about. So even when we're voting, the reason why we tell people you vote for people with the ideals that you hold, because all these things are things that come into play. How do you expect an MP who is very okay cracking sexual jokes, sexually violent jokes? How do you feel about that person representing you? Do you think if there's a sexual violence act, he's going to pass it? Do you really think that someone like that is going to pass any kind of policy that helps survivors? And so in every aspect of our lives, we see the very real, very life-shattering impact of the way in which we have been taught to view girls and women and children as well in our society, and how that impacts them when they're children and when they grow up, and how they view other people going through the same thing that they are going through. And so today I would just like for us to think about that in, for a few minutes before you start even asking me the questions. Think about it like that. Now, the theme for this year is support and fund, right? So we're going to talk about how we can support and fund survivors of gender-based violence. You don't have to have a lot of money, I can tell you that. I don't have that much money. I don't have any money, to be honest. But there are ways in which we can support. There are sometimes ways in which you don't even realize you're supporting. But even just defending people on your social media is a form of support. Even if it's one city to an organization that is heavily invested in fighting sexual gender-based violence, that's what you have. It doesn't have to be 1,000. It doesn't have to be 500. It doesn't have to be to the UN, and it doesn't have to be to some huge organization. In your communities, what's happening there? There are many community projects happening in many communities in Ghana, in Accra. What's happening there? Have you ever bothered to find out if there are any of these things happening? Have you gone to your local DOFSU office right down your street in the police station to even ask them, what's DOFSU doing in my area about gender-based violence, and how can I help? Sometimes it's not even money. You can always volunteer, which is how I've started for most of my life, to volunteer. So instead of, if I don't have money, then I go and give my time and my energy and volunteer. And these are things that we can do and need to do in order to support ourselves. And you may think, oh, I don't know anybody who has gone through that. Nobody has told me that, so I don't really, I don't understand why I need to be involved in this. Why I haven't been raped before. Oh, me, I don't think my brothers have raped anybody before, so I'm okay. You can say all that. However, do you really have to know anybody to see that something is wrong and help other people? Do you have to know anyone who has been hit by a car to sympathize that getting hit by a car is wrong or is painful? You don't really need to. Do you need to know someone died to say, oh, that's so sad that the person died? No. Because even the loss of human life alone to any well-meaning person is like, oh, that's sad that someone died. And it's the same thing with SGBV. You do not need to actively know, even though it's good to ask and to be conscious of it in your immediate circles. However, if you find yourself as lucky as you could be and not knowing anybody who's been through it, I think it's important to understand the things that we can do and the things that we can stop doing and stop saying and stop co-signing and laughing at and saying, oh, that's making excuses for, and saying that's fine, there's nothing really wrong with that. There's so many things that we can do to support and to fund things that we think are wrong, unless of course we don't know that they are wrong, which I don't think anybody here is going to sit down and say I don't know. is wrong. I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever admit that they don't know it's wrong. And so those are some of the things that I think that I would like for us to think about today. Don't know if anyone has any more questions. Okay.
Well, viewers, friends, and comrades, no doubt that was a very brilliant presentation. We now come into the studio audience to take your comments, your questions, and everything. But just before we do that, I mean, there are so many things that we overlook which contribute to gender-based violence, which is itself derived from discrimination on the basis of gender and so on. Now, something happened last week in Ghana, very significant. The politicians like to boast about the number of women they've appointed to important places and so on, as if that is the end of the story. We are told that Ghana is making a lot of progress. Our Attorney General is a woman. We had a Chief Justice who was a woman, and we have the chairperson of the Electoral Commission who is also a woman. Now, how many people noticed what the Electoral Commission did 2 weeks ago? The Electoral Commission published something that it called was the curriculum, the CV, of aspiring candidates. And the emphasis was on their marital status, the number of children they have, and so on. You understand? Now, what this led to was a debate about who is qualified to be president. A lot of people came and said, oh, but this woman cannot be president. She has children and she doesn't have a husband. I'm sure you all heard this rubbish. You understand? Now, for me, ask the most important question. If you take the 1992 Constitution, the 1992 Constitution is clear. It says that to qualify to be president of Ghana, you have to be 40 years and above. You have to be a Ghanaian citizen. You have to be of sound mind, and you must be a registered voter. 4 qualifications. So what business does the Electoral Commission have finding out about people's marital status and so on, when it's not part of the qualification? Meanwhile, the Electoral Commission has not done any psychiatric test of the candidates. That which is required by the Constitution has been ignored, because the Constitution said that people must be of sound mind. So the Electoral Commission should be requiring certificates of sanity from the presidential candidate. It's not interested. It's interested in whether they are married, whether they have children, and so on. And I think that the gender movement, I want to talk about the gender movement. I'm not talking about movement of women. I'm talking about a movement of all persons who are outraged by gender discrimination and gender-based violence, and to insist that the Electoral Commission must strictly fulfill its mandate. This is terrible. Terrible, and yet we've done it, and we are satisfied with it and so on. Well, that's my take on the subject. Anybody has an issue to raise, question to ask, comment to make, just show your hand. Please just show your hand, because we may not have this round again. So just show your hand for now and let's get on with it. So I see 5 hands, and we're going to start with Caris. And then we move to Jack Toronto. And then we'll come to you, number 3. And then we'll go to you, number 4. And then we come to you, number 5. and then we'll go to you, number 6. But here is the catch. Normally this program should be off air by 6:30. We've already done 35 minutes, and strictly speaking, we have 25 minutes. I'm going to plead with the director and producer to give us an extension because of the very special nature of this program. But still, please be reminded that we don't have all time. So don't give a lecture. Don't give us a lecture when you come here. 2 minutes should be enough for you to say what you want to say. So we're starting with Caris. Caris, please come to the microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that we have a survivor, and there are so many people who have also suffered, and they might have to live with it because they cannot speak up. And you mentioned that you have gone through and you are getting healed, or you are healed. If you wouldn't mind, could you share your experience with us? How did you overcome? In fact, this program is being broadcast within, I think, about 32 countries, and there are so many women in these countries who have become victims. If you could share with us so that you also pick something from it. Thank you.
I have 4 questions. Yeah, but I think that they are intertwined. So if you are going to answer them, they'll be a bit easier for all of us. My question on like something like a feminism manual, and so if you read Chimamanda's the manifesto, feminist manifesto, she talks about, in the book she admits that when she's asked about feminism, she clearly doesn't exactly know what really makes one a feminist. And so don't you think that it's time that feminism or the feminist movements, gender advocates, have a manual that clearly stipulates what feminism stands for, what it does and what it does not do? And for other political ideologies like socialism, we know you have to learn like the Communist Manifesto. These are things that clearly define the work you do. Then the second thing is I've listened to many other feminists, and many times it looks like a battle between men and women. Isn't it supposed to be a battle between patriarchy and feminism? That there could be men that don't support patriarchy and support feminism, and there could be women that support patriarchy and don't support feminism. So the bit of the battle thing. And then you speak about social construct, and I think that our language in itself also promotes gender-based violence and patriarchy in a sense. Even in English, if a teacher is speaking to a child, he says, "Man up." And so you are a young man up. And so there's this connotation that if you're a man, you need to be assertive, and other. If you're a woman, you need to be down. And so do you think that probably should be looking at our grammar is not ours, so I don't know whether we can change it. But should we start looking at making sure that the language we speak connotes the kind of things that we want to preach? Thank you.
Okay, and my question revolves around the gender-based sexual violence, and the question goes this way: is there any other way apart from educating the populace, especially the little ones, about gender-based sexual violence? I ask because I think education isn't solving the problem as it should, since the more we expose or educate the little ones about sexual stuff and its abuse, the more they would be inquisitive to try those sexual stuffs. Thank you. You don't get the question? Okay, thank
you. Good evening, comrades, and thanks so much for giving us this kind of enlightenment. But I'll ask just a question. Can a house be divided against itself? The reason why I'm asking this question is, when the vice presidential candidate of NDC was nominated, there was a big backlash against the lady. I felt there are so many movements, even men came and rallied behind the woman. Is it because of politics that the women didn't come out to support Nana Jane, the professor, when all this backlash were coming from the opposite political party? I think that's all the question I have for you now.
Good evening, comrades. So my question is more of the economic aspect of this whole gender-based violence. We've come to realize that even after one has suffered, the tragedy of going through this whole, abuse and stuff like that, one still has to pay for medical services, and one still has to pay for, court proceedings and all of that. And so there's this extra economic burden on poor women. Even as we are talking about all women, there's this extra burden on poor women. So we tend to realize that they do not even want to report because it's too expensive to seek justice. And so I'd like your comments on what we can do as a society to move us away from putting that extra economic burden on survivors.
Thank you very much, Madam, for the submission. In the period of the lockdown across the world, there were reports of a high increase of domestic violence. I mean, just because men were now in the house. And it's also important to understand that gender-based violence is just a manifestation of a larger problem of patriarchy. And when we talk about violence, we should know that it is about a perpetrator and a victim. And normally when we are talking about solutions, we are talking about educating young girls, and you mentioned it. And actually most of the time, it clouds the solution that we are actually supposed to bring, because it's about a perpetrator and a victim. And then the solution shouldn't be with the victim. The address should be on men who are the perpetrators of gender-based violence. So it is important to always mention that men are the problem, and that they are the problem also because of the system of patriarchy, and that patriarchy should be our target. Thank you very much.
Okay, so those are lots of questions. Okay, so I'm going to start from the first question that I got, was some of the tips on how I healed or how I am healing, because I'm still healing. What we need to understand is that this is not something that you heal from, like, completely. There's still days when I have to talk about it, and it's always an issue. Still, I may steel myself and, not cry or anything, but it doesn't mean that, like, it's not affecting me in any way. The ways that I have gone through my healing is one, I've always had a supportive family, especially my mom. However, in my own childlike I thought, talking to my mom would hurt her, or it would make her feel like she wasn't a good mom. And also because my mom was an activist, and so having to tell your activist mother that somebody had done that to you was very difficult for me. And I was a very smart child, so I knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and so I kept it to myself. But when I did decide to come out, I think the most important thing for me was speaking about it, was putting a name to the person, was putting a face to the person, was putting a voice to what had happened. And so speaking about it usually is, like, for me, has been the best part of my healing process. Every time I get on stage, or every time I go on the radio or TV to talk about what happened, it may be difficult, but it's extremely helpful, because it allows you to shed that thing where they try to shame you for what you've done. You shed the shame, every time you speak about it, because you're open, and also because as you talk about it, many times other women would come to you and say, I've been through it. And the fact that you know that you've empowered somebody else to even name the trauma or talk about it or start their healing process is very much empowering. And so for me, being able to be part of the process of other people's healing has really helped me. Another thing is having a family that is largely very supportive. I'm going to mention, I keep mentioning my mom because she has been very, very supportive of me. She's been there for me. My mom is a no holds barred person. She'll tell you what she thinks, and in her own nice Iraba fancy way, she'll let you know exactly what she's thinking about it. And so that has really helped me. Another thing is professional help. A lot of the times it's very stereotyped here. Like when you go to a psychologist here, and so there's a lot of stigma around seeing a professional. It's like going to a pastor to help you with heart disease. That doesn't make sense. There's someone who has gone to school for 7 years, has practiced for 10 years, specifically on heart disease, and then you go to somebody who knows nothing about the heart to cure you of the heart disease, when you could go to the person who has specialized in it. And so that's something that we need to start also looking at as part of the activism, is looking at ways a society demystify going to mental health professionals, how we can destigmatize seeing mental health professionals, and how we can also make it accessible to people, because for a lot of people it's quite expensive. It's an expense that they can't afford. And that brings me to someone about, I'll go on to Kwamna's question about the economic strain of dealing with SGBV. So again, mental health professional, extremely important when you're dealing with gender-based violence. It helps a ton. And you also sometimes can meet other people who have been through it, because sometimes the loneliness as well, thinking that you're the only person, can also be very crippling. And so even when you meet other people who have, if you go to support groups and you meet other survivors, that can also help. And also loving yourself and living your best life. Like learning to love yourself again is something that people don't understand. It takes a very long time. When someone violates your body like that, you start to hate yourself. For some people, you hate yourself. And so the process of having to go through that time where you learn to love yourself again, eating right. For a long time, I was not eating because I didn't see like the need. So eating right, treating my body right, treating my mental health right, even being able to take breaks for me was a burden. It was like, if I take a break and I have to stop and think about it. But then I've had to learn that it's important to actually take the breaks, because that's how you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to replenish yourself and, bring new energy. So those are some of the things that you can do when it comes to healing. Feminists versus men. It is true that the problem is the patriarchy, but the benefactors of the patriarchy are men, and the perpetrators mostly are men. And so yes, if feminists are talking about the patriarchy and talking about the trauma that women go through under the patriarchy, men will be involved. You cannot talk about racism without talking about white people or Europeans, and so you can't expect us to talk about the patriarchy without talking about men. It's virtually impossible. The two go hand in hand, because the system was built by men to benefit men. And so if we want to break it down or burn it to the ground, we have to tackle how men benefit from that system and why they shouldn't be okay with benefiting from an unfair system. That's the thing. It's an unfair advantage that you have over women. And so if you are offended by a feminist talking about how you unfairly are advantaged by a system of oppression, then you're probably guilty of what they're talking about, or you just don't want it to be spoken about so that you too can one day enjoy the benefits. However, very well-meaning men tend not to care when we're talking about it, because they understand that it's a system put in place. And the fact is that most of the perpetrators are men, and therefore, ebechu kaka. And it's part of their allyship to go through that and take the blame for that. I was talking to my brothers today, and I was talking about men, and none of them said anything. Well, first of all, they're not the ones I'm talking about. Probably because they're not doing what I was saying. So they were not offended. So they just listened to me and they were like, it's true, mommy, that thing needs to change. And that was it. So I think if men can start to see the problem as it is true, men are mostly the perpetrators. Therefore, when feminists or other, even non-feminist women are calling out the patriarchy and they involve men, if we are not doing it, we should not be offended because it's wrong. At the baseline of it, what's happening is wrong. And that's what you should be focused on. So that's the feminist manual. I think the thing about feminism is that because feminism looks so different in so many different places and has so many different impacts and problems to tackle depending on the culture of the people, it's very hard to just put down a manual for all feminists. For instance, when I talk to my friends who come from Europe, none of them are dealing with conversations of a woman has to stay in the house and cook. They can't relate. To them, it's like, why are African feminists so far behind? Because they've mostly passed that point. For them now, it's more economical than anything. And also they're dealing with other forms of violence. But the conversation surrounding gender roles at home, for the most part, has been tackled. Most people, even the men, you find the most misogynistic men in Europe, and they're not misogynistic about who's cooking. They're most misogynistic about, reproductive rights and sex and those things. But then they're not talking about the wife has to come home and cook every day. Most of the time, that's not the conversation because the system has gotten to a point where it's advanced past ours. And so the reason a feminist manual will be so difficult is because people are at different stages. They're very basic, I wouldn't say requirements, but they're very basic things about feminism that resound in all parts of the world. It's just the basic call for equality. And who does the inequality affect the most? Women and girls. And so that's the basis. But in terms of details and the nuance surrounding the issues, it's very hard to pinpoint a particular manual for something like feminism. And so I think that's why feminists have not really come up with like a feminist manual. But I mean, there's so many theoretical books and papers and stuff, articles on feminism that you can easily read and update yourself on. Language, yes, I did mention when I was making my presentation that the way we talk about issues is very important. The way we even speak about, for instance, one of my gripes with the media in Ghana especially has been how people headline or editors headline stories about sexual gender-based violence. The emphasis is always on the victim. They don't hardly show the face of the perpetrator, and even when they do, the headline doesn't corroborate what it is that they're talking about. They're more talking about, so this girl was raped. No, this man is a rapist. And then the second line should be, okay, so he raped so and so, like not with a name obviously, but he raped a 9-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 20-year-old. But at the end of the day, the person who did the thing should be the headline, not the person who went through the trauma. And so those are some of the things that I have a problem with. So yes, our language, and it's, like I mentioned, telling girls that they're going to be first lady instead of just saying like you can be president. What's wrong with that? Why does it come so now? So all of these things are ways in which we've been conditioned to think, always see girls in second place, or always see girls, in subservience to men, which is a problem. Is there any way aside from education that tackles SGBV? From that angle, I think you asked that question. So I was feeling your question till you said, if we start to teach the children, they will start to want to do it. I find that very problematic. When you tell a child that they shouldn't put their hand in a socket, when they do it the first time and their hand is going and you say, hey, don't do it, it will shock you. And you try and play with them and tell them, like, explain to them how it works. Many children after a few times they back away. They don't want to go. Mommy says it will hurt mommy. Hey, maybe I don't want to be doing that. They will try like they are going out and they see you, then they stop. Watch children how they behave. Most children don't care about sex. It's not something they're thinking about, and that's why even that language alone is problematic. Because then what you're doing is you're sexualizing children or thinking that they're sexual beings, and then at the ages I was talking about, 2, 3, they're not. teaching children about language and how to describe themselves. For instance, in my house, I don't know if I can say this on TV, but in my house, can I say the private parts on TV? What are our laws? I can't hear. So in my home, penis and vagina are very open things that we say in the house. You come to my house, my son is never going to come and stand there and tell me that my PP or no, we don't say that. It's very open because I want there to be a situation where if anybody ever touched him, he could come and say, Mommy, this person touched my penis. You don't teach children the correct language. And so and you play around the issue. So to them, it's a playing thing. So when it's happening, they can't bring the two together. Because in their minds, this thing is something that mommy, it's some playing thing. But also, I'm feeling violated because children do feel violated when it happens to them. So you need to be straightforward with them. A rapist doesn't care if your child is 6 months old. They're going to rape them. A rapist doesn't care if you are 2. So you should tell them when it's what can happen. And my education on children is only on the culture of silence. In no way am I taking away from the perpetrator. I'm saying that teach our children not to be silent. And in the cultures that we have that enforce silence are bad for our kids. So that's what I was talking about. Then women are their own enemies. That you asked pardon? A house cannot stand against it. Okay. So the thing is, when you say that women were not supporting Madam Jane, I find that to be a bit dishonest because there were so many women on my timeline that were supporting Madam Jane. Obviously, we are not in the, and that's one of the things I was talking about earlier, that we are not monosyllabic, we're not monotonous people, we're not it's not black and white. There's so many, it's a spectrum. So you have from black all the way to white, but between the black and white, there's different shades of grey, and that's what women are. And so the fact that even I wasn't supportive of Madam Jane, reason being, I have not heard any policies that tell me that the fact that she's a woman, she's going to do something about the very serious issues facing women in Ghana. I am somebody who wants to, I don't want respectability politics, and I don't want tokenism. That's not what I'm looking for. As a person who wants to vote, I'm looking for real policies. So if I don't immediately jump and say I'm going to vote for her, it's not because I'm not going to vote for this because she's a woman. I don't vote, period, for men or women, because I don't see the policies that they are giving me that will help me. All I see is the corruption. So me personally, I was one of the people who I didn't come out to insult her, because I wouldn't do that. Because the insults that were coming out were very sexist, and I was strongly against that. However, as a citizen of Ghana, I want to hear your policies before I throw my support behind you. I'm not going to just support you just because you're a woman, and I'm not going to support a man because he's a man either. So those are the things that you have to understand, that we're not supposed to all be friends. Feminism is not about a sisterhood, it's just about equality. I don't have to like every woman to be a feminist. I don't like every woman. I don't like the woman who defended Harvey Weinstein. That doesn't make me less of a feminist. I don't like her ideals and her principles, so I don't have to like her. But that doesn't mean that I do not want her to have equality. That doesn't mean I don't want her to have equal rights to people. So you have to understand that there are different women and different reactions to different things, and we don't always have to like each other or be the same. Now, the insults that were sexist going towards her, like I said, the feminist in me didn't allow me to keep quiet on those things. Women, and for me, as an activist against gender-based violence, I'm not hearing policies about that specifically. So I'll wait to hear that. However, I'll also not stand there for anybody to insult her based on how she looks, or based on who she's married to, or why is she leaving her children at home. Those are all very sexist things, and we can be against that. The two can live simultaneously together in the same person. We don't always have to agree. And so there are women who will insult her because of political reasons, and there are women who will support her. That doesn't mean that men don't like each other at all. Let's be honest. You guys go to war against each other. You enslave your own countries. All these things. But we don't hear people saying men are their own enemies. So why is it that when women have a little misunderstanding, all of a sudden the whole of womanhood has to bear the brunt of two women having a misunderstanding? That's the problem. And those are the toxic narratives that we have, that we need to watch when we're talking about we shouldn't be saying women are their own enemies, because to be honest, the people who have helped me, a lot of them have been women. So those are some of the languages that we're talking about that need to be changed. The economic burden on women in reporting SGBV. So this is one of the reasons I said that I was not immediately impressed just because there was a woman vice presidential candidate. One of the reasons being, this is one of the things that I'm very, very strong on. The fact that there are no policies supporting, why should a woman in Ghana, the average, how much is the average salary in Ghana? Because I know that even for, let's just say, the most basic help that we have in our homes, usually house helps. How many house helps are paid over 300 Ghana cedis? Yet when a house help, let's say a house help, because that's, when they are raped or when they are abused or harassed or whatever, and they have to go to the police station or the hospital, they have to pay 300 Ghana cedis. That's their whole salary gone. A lot of these women have children. So these are some of the policies that I want to hear from our candidates, be it men or women. If you truly say you are putting gender on the agenda, I want to hear your policies on some of these things. Why are women having to pay to report cases? There's no other case in this country that you have to report and pay for unless there's corruption in the police station. But if there's no corruption, you don't have to pay to go and report armed robbery. You don't have to pay to go and report fraud. Why do we have to go and pay to report a crime like rape? Why should that not be a cost that's taken up by government? What's the government there for? Or why are there not policies that support, subsidizing rape kits? Why is there not proper training for personnel who are the first responders to survivors? Why do you walk into a police station and the first thing they're asking about you, what were you doing there? Why is a person working in DOFSU not adequately trained to handle somebody who has just been through that kind of shock and that kind of trauma? So those are policies that I want to see put before Parliament. And like I said earlier, if you're not holding these people responsible who we pay taxes to, they're not going to pass these policies. If you're not holding them accountable for the jokes they make on radio regarding violence against women, these are not the people who are going to go to Parliament to pass these policies for you, because these are the people who benefit from the system that allows women to be victimized and objectified and shamed and violated in the ways that we are. So these are some of the things that I think that we have to look at. Even when we're voting, a lot of the time we need to look at those things. What policies is this person passing that's going to directly affect me as a Ghanaian, and do I want to be behind those policies? That's an informed voter. Not all votes are equal. I always say this. There are people who just vote for the sake of voting, and there are people who think about the consequences of which candidate comes into power or which person wins the election. And I think that we should all strive to be and making our choices based on what policies the person is bringing. And so far, to be very honest with you, none of our presidential candidates are talking about anything to do with gender, specifically tackling issues, real life issues that we activists and women in general are facing. And so none of them are getting any of my votes. And that's just me being very, very straightforward about that question.
Well, a number of questions really arise from our conversation so far. And one of the questions is simply, what are policies that impact on gender? So, what are those policies? How are those policies expressed? How do we get to know about those policies and so on? And I ask these questions in relation to Mami's statement that she doesn't see any policies, so. I do remember that when Professor Jane Nana Opoku-Agyeman was Minister of Education, she was very seriously concerned about girl-child education. And she sought to tackle one of the limitations to girl-child education. For example, the problems with menstruation and so on, and how they didn't have access to sanitary pads and so on, which was a hindrance to the education. Is that not a policy which somehow, some way, is related to gender and so on. That's one. I mean, recently, she's been seriously advocating the extension of maternity leave. Of course, you know, I'm a father, and I had a mother, and I also had a father, and so on. You understand? And if you look at the laws of Ghana, I mean, regarding maternity leave and so on, women are compelled to go to work when babies are 6 weeks old. Have you seen a 6-week-old baby before? So extending the maternity leave is a major policy issue. In fact, some countries have even begun now granting paternity leave. You know, Cuba, etc., they grant paternity leave. So I see that as also something related to gender. So I like to understand why you don't consider these policy issues. When you come. When you come. Well, these are major policy issues. And there's more, you understand. So that's aside. Now we like to go to all these platforms. And I don't know what I'm going to find there. But I see quite a few messages. This is a message from a guy called Obeying Ransford. And it's a voice note. And I don't see how we're going to be able to deal with that on this program. We are not prepared for that. This one is also a voice note. I can't deal with that. Wow. This one goes to Romans chapter 12, verse 21. What does it mean? It says, don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. Wow. Okay, thank you very much. We will deal with evil. Whatever evil is, we will deal with it. This is from Caris. Is it the Caris in the studio? Well, it says, I have a problem with the way some radio stations dramatize or sensationalize rape. I think it traumatizes the victims and reminds them of how they were raped. How do we correct that? I thought that Mami had already dealt to some extent with that, but she's free to continue. Oh, Aaron, from Inside Ho, Aaron, I beg you. This program is not about me. I appreciate you saying nice things about me, but please, I beg you. Another platform, or don't say it at all, is not necessary. You know, thank you very much anyway. This is from Tomla. Tomla, first time I'm hearing this name, Tomla. Tomla from Mankranso. And Tomla from Mankranso says, a John and Jane government will bring back the free fertilizer. Oh. Free fertilizer policy and so on. Thank you, Tomla from Mankranso. And then this is from Holland. Amo says, we have to unlearn quite a bit to fight stereotypes. In first, gender stereotype toys are outlawed. No more G.I., Joe, or Barbie. Is it your opinion that this charter should be followed by all countries? Thank you, and it's from Holland, Amo, or is it Amo from Holland? Whatever it is. Then our Facebook page also has quite a few messages. And this is from Vitus, and please forgive me if I can't pronounce your name well. Some of the names I'm seeing them for the first time. This is from Vitus. Hey, Asamaba. Tuo Tuolonno, Tuolonno. And Tuolonno simply says, is watching us from Wa. Abdul Salam Rufai says, is it really true that what men can do, women can do it better? And yet societies all over the world pay women less than the men, even when they do the same job. And this is from Abdul from Chicago. Momo Queen simply says, I love this topic. I'm learning a lot. Vincent Kingsford Beidou. Vincent Kingsford Beidou, greetings. Thank you. Thank you for greetings. Abdul Haq Ibrahim. There's already too much burden, as said by Kwabena. The law in our society is for the rich. The poor can only be encouraged through the work of our true journalists and media houses that do not run like our very own Pan-African television. Down with patriarchy. And then Bright Fiaga also says that he's watching and learning a lot from the program. At this stage, we like to invite Mami and give her 4 minutes to round up. Just 4 minutes to round up, Mami.
Okay, so the question about gender advocacy and extending maternal leave, these are things that, to be quite honest, they're not, dare I say, they're not radical. These are things that are very normalized, and when we're talking, that's the reason I did not view that as something that would make me vote for somebody, because maternal leave is something that most people are not against. It's not something that of gender rights and women's rights. So it's gone to it's a subject that's gone to the point where it's become quite normalized for people to understand that women need time to heal from, giving birth. They need time to bond with their children. But also, why are we not talking about men not being involved in being primary caregivers? Yes, the only biological need that a child gets from their mom is breast milk. Outside of that, men can perform all the others. Why are they not doing that? And why are we not challenging those kinds of... So those are things for me that I have, some of the reservations that I have. And I understand also that because of the time and effort I've put into my gender activism, sometimes my expectations may seem unreasonable because you tend to have that when you're in a space and it tends to become unreasonable. But to most people, it would seem like something that it is important. It's not as radical as I would think that someone in that position could be tackling. There's so many things that are very radical that you could immediately put your stamp on and work on, and those are things that I'm yet to see. And I'm not saying that because of that to don't support Madam Jane, because she has done some shakes the foundations, however, is extremely important as well. So these are some of the reasons I have my reservations. But this is purely from an activist like myself who's, been, me just don't add up. Another thing spoken about is also the fact that I think a lot of the times when we're talking about policy, we tend to think of things that are easily attainable. However, when you look at where we are as a country, the things that are very difficult is where we need to be going, because those are the things that actually set us up for the development that we need. So look at like Mr. Pratt mentioned the tokens that they've put in power. So yes, these women have very much earned their space there. We're not taking away from their capabilities. However, the fact that they are mentioned as tokens in itself is a problem. So they're one person or two people in a particular space is somehow an example of women's empowerment generally, which is not true. And so these are the things that I think should be tackled. These are the issues for me that are very much integral to how we set up our country to be equal for everybody, to be equal for 50% of the population who are voting mostly, age mostly. So I think the last thing I would like to say about the gender issue as it pertains to politics is that our views may vary, and that's fine. We all have, the things that we think are more important and why we want to vote for people. I am just saying that we need to be more informed when we are choosing our candidates or the people that we vote for. Just be more informed, and also don't vote for people for frivolous reasons like they're part of my tribe, which is something that's very common here. The policies that they enact, their personal beliefs and biases impact how they rule you. And so you need to be very cognizant, very aware of those things. In conclusion, I think I'd like to say that very, very much am I in support of having, women in power, because obviously we're fighting for that. But also, let's talk about the women who are not in power and the women who do not have the privilege to be there, who are the majority, by the way. What are we doing about them? How do the decisions of the women who have privilege affect the choices of the women who don't have that privilege? And those are things that that's why I said nuance is very important, because we can sit here all day and talk about relatively high class women who have had access to great education, have, holiday homes and stuff like that. Those are not the majority. The majority are the women in our market spaces. The majority are the women who are on the streets selling in traffic. The majority are the women who have 5-6 kids and are married but are basically single mothers because they do all the nurturing plus paying the bills. These are the women that we need to focus on because they are the majority. And so even as middle class women, we also need to acknowledge our privilege and the access that we have as women, and find ways and means to use our privilege and bring up, the women, or hold up the women who do not have access to that privilege as well. So that's something that has to probably be another program. But yeah, thank you very much.
Well, comrades, friends, viewers, studio audience, and all, I think it's just appropriate that I extend our thanks to Mami Ekuya Awerba, survivor and family in the studio. As a matter of fact, we're having difficulties in getting somebody to lead this discussion. We got her almost at the last minute. She agreed to come, and that itself is a huge plus. And she did extremely well. Another round of applause for Mami.